Hey everybody, we're getting ready to start our month 5 block for the Cabin by the Lake block of the month. And this one's really fun. It's a great technique for doing paper piecing. So we're going to make a classic New York beauty block. And this is one finished part of the New York beauty. You're going to have 4 blocks that look like this that'll be sewn together. And you also have some sashings. So if you've never done paper piecing before, part of the pattern is going to look really new to you. So in your pattern, you are given a white, just a regular copy paper of the paper piecing pattern. And what we've done for you is we've made this onto, copied it onto paper piecing paper for you. So this is the Carol Dokes paper piecing paper. It's really lightweight, almost like newsprint. So it's very easy to tear away. It's not translucent, so you don't see through it, but we'll be using a folding method that I like to use for paper piecing. So on the paper piecing pattern, you'll notice that you have all of these different letter number combinations. So we are going to start with the first number, A1. And then we're going to continue in order A2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. That is the order that our fabrics are placed and sewn on paper piecing. So the lines here on our pattern are the lines that we're going to sew on. So all of our fabric is placed on this blank side of our paper. And so it's kind of a process that I use of folding so that you can see where that fabric needs to be positioned. Your pattern for the cutting instructions is a little incomplete this month. So just to get you started, you'll need to make sure that the blue fabrics that you get, the larger squares, they're labeled month 5 A13 units, and they're blue. You'll get 2 different colors. I just took this entire piece that I was given and I cut it on the diagonal from corner to corner. So you have these big triangle sections. You're also going to be given your month 5 A12 units that are red-orange. So these are going to be for the center kind of like sun shape portion of your New York beauty. So these don't need to be cut down yet. And then you're also going to be given 2 different colors of blue and 4 different colors of gold. And it does not give you a size to cut these pieces. So because you're given a 4-inch strip of fabric, I just went ahead and cut that into segments that are about 3 inches wide. So all of those pieces are 4 inches by, I believe 3, maybe double check, yeah. 4 inches by 3 inches. And that should be plenty of excess for you to be able to place those fabrics and have enough. So you can see here on my finished block that this paper piece segment here, this sort of ray, has different points, and these are going to be your gold. And then I used my blue and I alternated them. Every other blue was a different color. So in your pattern instructions, it has you use the gold pieces always on the even numbers, and then the blue sections will always be the odd numbers. So gold are even and blue are odd. That's kind of how you know how that ray is going to form out from the center. So in your pattern, the piece that's a solid piece of paper, you're going to start by cutting these outside and inside segments apart right on the line. And this is just the regular copy paper portion. This is going to free those templates, the outside template and the inside template, from that paper piece portion so that we know how to cut those fabrics. So you don't need this copy paper. That piece is going to be used with the paper piecing paper. And so what I do is I take one of my orange sections and I place my template fabric right on top of that. Now you can see I've got plenty of extra fabric here. and just going to pin this in place. And you can take your rotary cutter or your scissor and you can cut that out so you have a piece that looks like this. So it's pretty easy to cut those, and we're keeping them bigger on this outside edge. I don't want you to cut any of this off here. Just worry about the curve, okay? Because we can square that up in a later step, and you'll be a little bit better off if you have extra fabric to square off. You're also going to do the same thing with your light blue fabric and your other portion of the template. So same thing, we want that excess fabric to be kind of hanging off the edge. We want that extra fabric insurance, and we're just going to be cutting that inside curve. And that is on the bias, so you want to be very careful not to stretch that out. So you can see I've got this piece already cut here for our demonstration. So these two things are going to be sewn together later on. So that's how you're going to cut the A13 and A12 sections. A tool that I love to use for paper piecing is my add a quarter ruler. And this one's a long one, but they make different size add a quarter rulers. It has a little lip. I'm just running my fingernail up against it. And that lip you can hold up against something and trim 1/4 of an inch away. And we're going to be using this for trimming our paper pieced block. So we're going to use all of these paper pieced copies that you got in your pattern to create this New York Beauty center section. So I always like to start with a glue stick, and I kind of just glue stick the area behind the A1 piece. So there's A1, and I've just, it's a little bit of a blue color. I've just glue sticked that. And I'm going to position, because that's a number 1, it's an odd. So odd colors are blue. And so I'm going to position my blue fabric with that glue right there. So if you look at the opposite side, I've completely covered that A1 portion with the blue. So the first seam that I'm going to sew is the line between the A1 and the A2. So what I do, so I know where everything needs to be placed and sewn, is I fold my fabric on that line that's going to be sewn. And I give it a nice press. Okay? I'm pressing that kind of a seam. So I'm going to look at this side, because this is the side I'm going to be placing my fabric down. So you see that crease? That is where I'm going to sew my line between A1 and A2. So now I'm going to take my A2 section and I'm going to place it right sides together. Now if you look, I'm going to put my add a quarter ruler down just so you can see this is where my creased line is. Do you see how I have about a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch? I can even exaggerate that. A little bit more than 1/4 of an inch extending past that fold line. So after I sew that, I'm going to fold this back so you can see, that's going to cover over that A2 section. So I'm going to put I like to use these flathead pins, and I kind of pin it away from where that sewing line is going to be, because that keeps it nice and flat on my machine. So now if you look at this opposite side here, I'm going to sew right on that line. And I sew a little past my seam allowance on either end. So I'm just going to take that to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew right on that line, and then I'll show you the next step. Now I'm using a sort of a cream thread, so you can see that that line has been stitched. The first line, the A1, A2 line. So now I can take my pin out, and all of this stuff here, that's extra. This is what's going to be part of my block. So I want to trim this extra stuff off. And I haven't pressed anything yet. So what I'm going to do is I still have it folded right where I folded it before. And my add a quarter ruler just bumps up right against the paper. You never want to cut paper when you're trimming. You're just cutting this excess fabric. And that's going to cut me, that's just extra, my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here. And you can see that that folds back and covers that triangle section for A2. I'm just going to give this a little press with my iron. And we'll continue to the next piece. So that's been pressed. I've sewn that yellow triangle unit here, completely extends all the way around. And now I'm going to fold my paper right on the A2 line. So this is the next line I'm going to sew, the line between A2 and 3. So now that I've pressed that, you can see here I've got a nice crease. That crease is where I'm going to, you can kind of see it, that crease is where I'm going to place my fabric. So I'm going to place another piece of blue. I'll go with a light color blue this time. And I'm going to place it 1/4 of an inch, extending beyond, or a little bit more. You can see this is where my crease is. So here's my fabric piece. It's not perfectly even. It's kind of a nice thing about paper piecing if you've got a big enough scrap. So there's my crease, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to sew on that line between A2 and A3. Paper piecing is really fun because you can get these perfectly perfect points where with some type of piecing you wouldn't be able to do that. So there's my seam here. So this is all extra. And so I can just keep my pin in there and fold it back just on that same line I folded before, the crease of the paper. Line up my add 1/4 ruler, and I trim off the excess. So trimming off all the excess from the previous piece and the seam allowance from this new piece. And now I press that back. You can see I cover that whole triangle area that is A3. And I'm just going to keep building on that, alternating between my blues and my yellows. Let's do one more together so you can see. I'm going to press it on that A3, A4 line. That's where I am now. So I've got a nice crease there. And now I'm going to place right sides together. Maybe a different color of yellow. Right sides together. And now I'm going to sew right on that line between the A3 and the A4. So I've sewn that A3, A4 line. I'll fold it back where I had it before so you can see all that excess. Line up my 1/4 of an inch at a 1/4 ruler. Trim off that excess seam. And now I'll be able to press that back and then just keep continuing on and on and on. So like all the magic in my videos, I already have one section that's been totally pieced together, and I have not trimmed anything yet. So now I'm ready to sew this completed paper piece section with the pieces here that I have trimmed for my New York Beauty Blog. So what I need to do, and if you're not a big eyeball person, you may want to mark. I'm totally an eyeball person, and I know my 1/4 of an inch by heart. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this, not right on the line. I'm going to trim with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay? So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to trim off all the excess fabric that I have. Just a 1/4 of an inch on the inside of my little curve, all the way. See that? And I'm going to come back out here and do the same. So then this section will be ready to sew with my curved piecing. You're going to keep that paper on. That stabilizes this. And also it gives us a line of where we're gonna sew. Okay, so I got all that trimmed off. Doesn't that look pretty now that it's been trimmed? So I'm gonna start by sewing this right sides together with the outside piece here. Now, I have plenty of extra fabric to square this off. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to go ahead and trim this inside portion just about 1/4 of an inch beyond that outside line. So I don't want a whole lot of excess there. And that's going to be easier for me to know where my start and stop is. There we go. So if you've never done curved piecing before, it's a little tricky. I do not pin when I curve piece, but you'll see lots of different quilters, and they may pin their blocks, but I really don't pin. I like to use a floating method. So I'm going to show you on my machine kind of close up, and we're going to get this sewn together so you can see how I like to paper piece. And the easiest part to paper piece is definitely going to be the outside section first, and then the inside section. So let's see how close we can get so you can see that this curve piecing and how that's going to be done. So I always like to have my, my fabric that is easiest to manipulate on the bottom. So for this particular project, it's going to be the outside blue fabric. And then I'm going to have this paper piece fabric on top. It's not going to stretch or be able to be manipulated because it still has the paper on it. So I have this curved portion on the bottom of my machine, and I know this really light fabric is sort of hard to see with the white, but this fabric also, it's kind of hard to see what the difference is between the right and the wrong side. So, because it's very, very light blue, almost white. It's so pretty though. So now I'm going to put right sides together, the edge of my curved section right here on the inside, and I'm going to start taking some stitches. I also like to stop with my needle down in the fabric, so I'm going to set my machine up for that, and I'm going to follow the marked line on my fabric. Okay, so I've just started, stop down, and what I mean by float is I'm going to float this bottom piece, and I'm going to move it and drag it as I sew. So I'm going to take a few stitches, and as I start to get closer, I'm just going to move that bottom fabric over so that it stitches and it's even with these sides together. So because that's on the bias, it stretches, but you just want to be very careful when you're sewing it that you're not getting it too stretchy. So again, I'm trying to stay right on this line. And I'm really looking at the area of fabric just an inch in front of my needle. And as I get closer to my needle, I'll draw this outside fabric in and make those edges very even here. There we go. And now I've stitched those two pieces together, and you can see here, hopefully, that that's just nice and flat. And I've got my 1/4 inch seam, and I didn't sew over any of those little points. And now we're going to do the same thing for this fabric here, the center fabric. Now, remember I said you want to have the most manipulatable fabric on the bottom, but I found, for me, the easiest way to sew this part is with the excess fabric on the top. So again, I'm going to take a few stitches and I'll stop, and I'm just going to draw that fabric and make my edges even here. Sometimes I get a little ripple in that, that's okay. Just take a few little stitches and raise up my presser foot and kind of just manipulate that and move that over. Sometimes I just have to raise up my presser foot and get that drawn over to the edge again. I don't want any little tucks, but I also don't want to pull and stretch that fabric. So it's much easier if you just take your time, lift up your presser foot, and just making that very edge that I'm sewing right at that moment closer and closer to being even. There we go. Just a few more. You can see that this fabric behind my machine, hopefully you can see that, it's kind of drawing and curling around here. Like a little bit more. Just getting a few stitches in at a time. So all the way over to the edge. And now I have my center section sewn on as well. So I'm going to give this a nice press and kind of zoom out so you can see that bigger picture. These blocks, like I said, have room to get squared up. And so what you'll do is you'll measure what that block size is. Here. Let's get repositioned over here on our cutting mat. So you can see, here's my finished block that I just stitched together. And you can see here that we've got plenty of excess fabric to get sewn together. And I'm just going to get a measurement for you real quick. This block measures 7.5 inches. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to get your square up ruler and you're going to want to line that up and so that, you know, if you look at your pattern too here, and something like this, you have about 3/4 of an inch beyond of that blue fabric. So when you square that up, you want to make sure that you still have that extra, like about 3/4 inches of this blue out here. That's really important. Otherwise, when you go to sew these blocks together, you know, one piece might be a little up further or down further. But once you've got all your blocks pieced together and squared up, this is just like two, you're gonna have a really pretty looking sunrise for your cabin on the lake. A nice sunrise shining that light down on your cabin. So I hope you enjoyed paper piecing and making this New York Beauty block with a little bit of a challenge with paper piecing and curved piecing.